A boy walks into a diner during a thunderstorm carrying a coin that should not exist. He is 8 years old, soaked to the bone, and completely alone. 5 of the most dangerous men in the American Midwest are sitting 20 feet away, leather-cut veterans of a motorcycle brotherhood that has buried more secrets than most men ever carry. The boy holds out his hand. He shows them the coin, and every single one of them stops breathing, because engraved on that silver is a symbol only 5 men in the world would recognize: a dead man's mark. Tonight, a ghost is about to speak. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why grown men weep over a child's lucky coin. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The storm came in fast and mean, the kind that turns the sky green before it tears the world apart. It rolled across the flatlands of central Kansas like something alive, swallowing grain silos and fence posts and every last trace of daylight. By 7 in the evening, the highway was black except for the occasional flash of lightning that turned the asphalt into a mirror. Rain hit the ground so hard it bounced. The wind screamed through the power lines, and somewhere out there in the teeth of it, a child was walking. Ethan Mercer was 8 years old, and he weighed 53 pounds, and he had been walking for almost 2 hours. His sneakers were full of water. His t-shirt clung to his ribs like a second skin. He kept one hand pressed against his chest, fingers curled tight around a small object in his front pocket, and the other hand he used to shield his eyes from the rain. He did not cry. He had stopped crying about 40 minutes ago, when he realized crying used energy, and energy was something he could not afford to waste. His mother had taught him that. His mother had taught him a lot of things in the weeks before she disappeared. Find the men who will recognize the coin. That was the last thing she told him. Not goodbye. Not I love you. Just that one instruction, delivered in a voice that sounded like it had already accepted something terrible. The diner appeared through the rain like a hallucination. A low-slung building with a corrugated tin roof and a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. Gracie's, half the letters dead. 2 pickup trucks sat in the gravel lot, and 5 motorcycles. Big ones, black and chrome, lined up like sleeping predators, their leather saddlebags dark with rain. Ethan pushed through the front door and stood dripping on the tile floor. The diner smelled like burned coffee and bacon grease, and something underneath that, something old, like the building itself was tired. A woman behind the counter looked up. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a dish rag over her shoulder. She stared at Ethan the way people stare at things that don't belong. "Honey, where's your mama?" Ethan didn't answer. He was looking past her, past the counter, past the rotating pie display with its cracked plastic dome. He was looking at the 5 men sitting in the back booth. They filled the space the way boulders fill a riverbed. Broad shoulders, weathered hands, faces that had been broken and healed and broken again. They wore leather cuts, black vests stitched with patches and insignia, over flannel shirts and thermal layers. Their boots left mud tracks on the floor. Empty coffee cups and half-eaten plates of food cluttered the table. One of them was cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. Another was staring out the window at the storm with the 1,000-yard gaze of a man who had seen worse weather in places that don't appear on civilian maps. The patches on their backs read, "Iron Vultures MC." And below that, in smaller letters, "Original Chapter." The woman behind the counter, Gracie, presumably, came around and knelt in front of Ethan. "Sweetheart, you can't be out in this. Where did you come from? Is someone coming to get you?" "I need to find the men," Ethan said. His voice was small but steady. "The ones who know the coin." Gracie blinked. She looked back at the bikers. The one cleaning his nails had stopped. All 5 of them were watching now. The man at the head of the booth stood up slowly. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with a shaved head and a beard that had gone gray at the edges. His arms were roped with old tattoos that crawled from his wrists to his collarbone. A scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, pulling his expression into something that always looked slightly dangerous even when he wasn't trying. His name was Rex Holloway. He was 47 years old. He was the president of the Iron Vultures, a title he had held for 11 years and had never once enjoyed. Rex walked toward the boy with the careful, measured steps of a man who understood that his size frightened people. He stopped 6 feet away and crouched down, bringing his eyes level with Ethan's. "You hungry, kid?" Ethan nodded. "Gracie, get him whatever he wants. Put it on my tab." "Rex, put it on my tab." Gracie pressed her lips together but said nothing. She guided Ethan to a stool at the counter and set a menu in front of him. The boy ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of milk. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from something deeper than cold. Rex returned to the booth and sat down. The 4 men around him were silent, but their silence had a texture to it. The heavy, loaded quiet of men who communicate in glances and jaw movements, and the angle of a cigarette held between 2 fingers. "Kids alone," said Deke Morrison, the one who had been staring out the window. Deke was the club's road captain, a wiry, narrow-faced man with a prosthetic left hand he'd earned in Fallujah. He never talked about Fallujah. He never talked about anything that mattered, which was why everyone trusted him with everything that did. "Storm's not letting up. Someone dropped him, or he walked." "Nobody walks 2 miles in this," said Colt Brannigan. Colt was the youngest of the 5 at 39, a former Army medic with a boxer's nose and eyes that were always calculating distances and exits. He had a daughter he hadn't seen in 4 years. He never said her name. He came from somewhere close, or he came from nowhere at all. He said something about a coin. This from Harlan Teague, the club's sergeant-at-arms. Harlan was built like a refrigerator and spoke like he was rationing words for a long winter. Said he was looking for men who know a coin. The 5th man said nothing. Boone Cassidy sat at the far end of the booth with his arms crossed over his chest and his jaw set. Boone was the club's enforcer, a role that suited his temperament the way a holster suits a weapon. He had been sober for 3 years, drunk for the 15 before that, and somewhere in between he had lost a wife, a house, and most of his ability to feel anything that wasn't anger or regret. He watched the boy eat the grilled cheese sandwich in quick, desperate bites, and something moved behind his eyes that he immediately buried. "I'll talk to him," Rex said. "Rex!" Deke's voice carried a warning. "We don't know what this is." "He's 8. I think I can handle it." Rex stood again and walked to the counter. He sat on the stool next to Ethan and waited. The boy finished his sandwich, drank half the milk, and then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Lightning flashed outside. The neon sign buzzed and went dark for 3 seconds before flickering back. "What's your name?" Rex asked. "Ethan?" "Ethan what?" "Ethan Mercer." "Where's your family, Ethan?" The boy was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver coin. It was about the size of a $50, tarnished with age, and it caught the overhead light in a way that made it glow. Ethan held it out on his flat palm like an offering. "My mom gave me this. She said it's my lucky coin. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find the men who recognize it." Rex looked at the coin. On the front was a vulture with spread wings, stylized, rough, hand-engraved. He had seen this design before. Every man in that booth had seen it before. It was the original charter mark of the Iron Vultures, the founding symbol scratched into a coin 15 years ago by 5 men sitting around a campfire in the Ozarks, making promises they thought would last forever. Rex picked up the coin and turned it over. The back bore a second engraving, 2 letters intertwined, LK, surrounded by a ring of small dots. The dots weren't decorative. They were a code, a location cipher that only the original 5 knew how to read, because they had invented it themselves during a road trip through Montana in 2008 when they were young and paranoid and convinced that brotherhood meant sharing secrets no one else would ever understand. Rex's hand closed around the coin. His knuckles went white. He turned and looked at the booth. Every man was staring at him. Deke had gone pale. Colt's hand was flat on the table like he was bracing for an earthquake. Harlan's jaw was working, but no sound came out. Boone had uncrossed his arms and was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to bend the chrome trim. L.K. Lucas Kane, the man they had all believed was dead for 15 years. Rex turned back to Ethan. The boy was watching him with wide, dark eyes, eyes that Rex now saw with horrifying clarity belonged to someone else entirely, the shape of the jaw. the way the eyebrows sat, the stubborn set of the mouth. "Kid," Rex said, and his voice came out rough, scraped raw. "Who's your daddy?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't have one. Mom said he went away before I was born." Rex stared at the coin in his hand. The dots around the initials pulsed in his vision like a heartbeat. 15 years of guilt compressed into a small circle of silver. He walked back to the booth and placed the coin on the table. Nobody spoke for a long time. Gracie refilled coffee cups and retreated to the kitchen. The storm hammered against the windows. Somewhere, a transformer blew, and the lights dimmed and came back brighter, harsher, as if the building itself wanted them to see what was in front of them. "That's Lucas's coin," Deke said finally. His voice was flat, clinical, the voice he used when he was trying very hard not to feel something. "That's the charter mark. That's his cipher." "I can see that, Deke." "Then you can see what I see. That boy has Lucas's face." Silence. The kind that suffocates. "Lucas is dead," Boone said. It came out like a statement, but landed like a question. "He's been dead since 2011. We never found a body," Colt said quietly. "We didn't need a body. Renko's people confirmed it. They sent us photographs. They sent us—" Boone stopped. His throat worked. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down with a sound like a gunshot. "They sent us proof. Renko's people told us what Renko wanted us to hear," Rex said. He was standing at the head of the booth, both hands on the table, leaning forward like a man delivering testimony. "We knew that then. We know it now. We chose to believe it because believing it was easier than the alternative." The alternative. Nobody wanted to say it, so Rex said it for them. The alternative was that Lucas was alive somewhere, and we had stopped looking. Harlan's fist hit the table. Coffee cups rattled. A fork fell to the floor and nobody picked it up. "We searched for 8 months, Rex. 8 months. We burned through every contact, every safe house, every back-channel connection we had. We put 40,000 miles on our bikes looking for a man who didn't want to be found. Don't tell me we stopped looking. We ran out of places to look." "Then why does an 8-year-old boy have his coin?" Harlan had no answer for that. Rex sat down. He rubbed his face with both hands and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light above him buzzed with the particular frequency of exhaustion, the sound of a thing that has been running too long without repair. "Tell me about Lucas," Rex said, though he wasn't really speaking to anyone. He was speaking to the memory. "Tell me what we know. What we actually know, not what we told ourselves." What they actually knew was this. Lucas Kane was a founding member of the Iron Vultures. He was the smartest of the 5. Not book smart, though he had that too, but survival smart. He could read a room the way Deke could read a highway, and Boone could read a fight. He was the one who figured out that Victor Renko, the CEO of Sentinel Shield Private Security, was running a shadow operation beneath his legitimate business: blackmail, extortion, arms trafficking. The whole architecture of controlled violence that men like Renko build when they realize that law and order is just another commodity that can be bought and sold. Lucas had gathered evidence, recordings, documents, financial records that connected Renko to 3 unsolved murders and a network of corrupted officials across 4 states. He told the Brotherhood he was going to bring it to the feds. He told them it would be dangerous. He asked for their help, and they hesitated. Not because they were cowards, because they were afraid. Renko had resources they couldn't match. Former military operators, surveillance technology, law enforcement contacts who owed him favors. Going against Renko meant going against the machine, and every man at that table had spent his life learning that the machine always wins. They told Lucas to wait, to think it through, to find another way. Lucas didn't wait. He disappeared 3 weeks later. Renko's people put out the word that he was dead. They produced photographs, a burned vehicle, a body they claimed was his, dental records that were later conveniently lost in a records office fire. The Iron Vultures held a memorial ride. They drank whiskey around a bonfire and spoke about their brother in the past tense. And one by one, over the months and years that followed, the guilt ate them from the inside like acid. Rex became harder, colder. He ran the club with rigid discipline because discipline was the only thing that kept the shame from killing him. Deke withdrew into silence in long solo rides that lasted weeks. Colt threw himself into medical work, volunteering at VA clinics, trying to save other men because he couldn't save the one that mattered. Harlan buried his rage under routine: schedules, logistics, the mechanical operations of keeping the club alive. And Boone drank. He drank until the memories blurred, and then he drank more until they disappeared entirely. And when he finally got sober 3 years ago, he discovered that the memories were waiting for him, patient and unchanged, like creditors who never forget a debt. Now a child sat at the counter of a roadside diner licking grilled cheese crumbs from his fingers, and the past had come back in the worst possible form: small, vulnerable, and impossible to ignore. "We need to talk to the boy," Rex said. Carefully. "And then what?" Boone asked. "Then we find out who his mother is, where she went, and why she sent her 8-year-old kid into a thunderstorm with a dead man's coin." Rex approached Ethan again. This time the other 4 followed. They stood at a distance: Deke by the window, Colt near the door, Harlan by the jukebox, Boone leaning against the counter with his arms folded. A perimeter. Not threatening, protective. An instinct so old and so deep that none of them had consciously decided to do it. "Ethan," Rex said, sitting beside him again, "tell me about your mom." The boy's face changed. The steadiness he had maintained since walking through the door cracked, just slightly, like ice over a deep lake. "Her name's Claire Mercer. She works at the county library. She does reading programs for kids on Saturdays." He paused. "She used to." "Used to?" "She got fired 3 weeks ago. Some men came to the library and talked to her boss. After that, she didn't have a job anymore. She said it wasn't her fault. She said people were trying to make her scared." Rex's stomach tightened. "What people?" "I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. But they came to our house too. 2 men in a black car. They sat outside for a long time and then they left. Mom started packing our things that night. She said we were going on a trip." "Where?" "Everywhere. We stayed in motels. We moved every couple days. She kept looking out the window. She kept checking her phone. And then..." The boy's voice faltered. He pressed his hand against his pocket where the coin had been. "3 days ago, she dropped me off at a rest stop near the highway. She said she had to go somewhere alone. She said she'd come back. She gave me the coin, and she told me to find the men who would recognize it." Ethan nodded. His lower lip trembled exactly once before he locked it down. An 8-year-old boy managing his emotions with the discipline of a combat veteran. Rex wondered who had taught him that. He already knew the answer. "She didn't come back," Ethan said. The words hung in the air. Gracie had stopped washing dishes. The kitchen was silent. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Deke moved first. He came to the counter and knelt beside Ethan, his prosthetic hand resting on his knee. The mechanical fingers slightly open in a gesture that was as close to gentle as titanium could manage. "Ethan, did your mom ever mention anyone named Lucas?" The boy thought about it. "She had a box in the closet. She thought I didn't know about it, but I found it once. There were letters inside, old ones. The name on them was Lucas. She cried when she read them. She always cried quietly so I wouldn't hear, but I heard." Deke closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "That's enough for now," Rex said. He put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Carefully. The way you handle something fragile and important. You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." The 5 men gathered in the narrow hallway by the restrooms. The overhead light was broken, so they stood in semi-darkness, their faces half lit by the glow from the kitchen. Rex held the coin up between 2 fingers. "Claire Mercer. Lucas had a woman we never knew about. He had a child. He was alive long enough to have a child." "Or he got her pregnant before he disappeared," Colt said. "The timeline fits. If the boy's 8, he was conceived roughly 15 years ago, right before Lucas went under. Either way, someone's chasing this woman. Someone got her fired. Someone sat outside her house. Someone scared her bad enough to run." Rex's voice dropped to a register that the other men recognized. The command tone, the one that preceded decisions that couldn't be undone. "And now someone's out there with her, or she's out there alone. And her kid is standing in a diner in the middle of nowhere, holding the only thing she thought could save him. You're not saying what I think you're saying, Boone said. I'm saying we owe Lucas a debt we never paid. I'm saying his son is standing right there. And I'm saying that if Renko's people are involved in this, if Victor Renko is the reason this woman is running, then everything we failed to do 15 years ago is standing in front of us asking for a grilled cheese sandwich. Renko has an army, Rex. We have 5 men and the truth. The truth doesn't stop bullets. No, but it gives you a reason to ride into them. Boone stared at Rex for a long time. Then he looked down the hallway at the boy sitting alone at the counter, small and soaked and absolutely refusing to cry, and something shifted in his expression. Not softness, Boone didn't do soft, but recognition. The look of a man who sees his own stubbornness reflected in miniature and cannot look away. Fine, Boone said. But if this gets us killed, I want it on the record that I said it was stupid. Noted. They returned to the main room. Rex pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. A bail bondsman in Wichita who owed the club a favor and had access to county databases. While it rang, he watched Ethan draw on a napkin with a pen Gracie had given him. The boy was drawing motorcycles, 5 of them, lined up in a row. The call connected. Rex spoke in low tones for several minutes, gave Claire Mercer's name, and hung up. 3 days, he told the others. We'll know where she was last seen within 3 days. We might not have 3 days, Deke said. He was standing at the window. His prosthetic hand was pressed flat against the glass. There's a black SUV sitting in the parking lot. It wasn't there 5 minutes ago. Engines running. Lights are off. Every man in the room went still. Rex turned slowly toward the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, barely visible in the darkness, the shape of a vehicle sat between the 2 pickup trucks. Its engine idled with a low, predatory hum. Exhaust curled from the tailpipe and was instantly shredded by the wind. Ethan looked up from his drawing. His eyes found the window. His face went white. "Those are the men," he whispered. "Those are the men who came to our house." Rex looked at Deke. Deke looked at Boone. Boone looked at Harlan. Harlan looked at Colt. 5 sets of eyes, communicating 15 years of shared language in a single heartbeat. Rex knelt in front of Ethan. He placed both hands on the boy's arms and looked directly into his eyes. "Listen to me. You're going to go behind that counter and sit on the floor next to Gracie. You're going to stay there until I come get you. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded. "Good." Rex stood and turned toward the door. The other 4 were already moving, jackets on, shoulders set, boots heavy on the tile. Outside, the storm raged. The black SUV sat in the parking lot like a held breath. Rex pushed the door open and stepped into the rain. The headlights of the SUV snapped on. And from behind the counter, clutching his father's coin with both hands, Ethan Mercer watched 5 men walk into the storm like they had been waiting their whole lives for this exact moment, and realized, with the terrifying clarity that only children possess, that whatever was about to happen next would change everything. The SUV doors opened. 2 men stepped out. And the first shot of a war 15 years overdue echoed across the empty Kansas highway like a crack in the world itself. The 2 men who stepped out of the SUV were not amateurs. Rex could see that immediately. The way they moved, the way their weight shifted, the way their hands stayed loose at their sides but close to their waistlines. Former military or private security? Probably both. They wore dark jackets and no visible identification, and they stood in the rain like it didn't exist. The taller one raised both hands, palms out. "Easy, gentlemen. Nobody needs to get excited." Rex stopped 10 feet from the SUV. Deke flanked his right, Boone his left. Colt and Harlan spread wider, creating a loose semicircle that cut off the 2 men's path back to the vehicle. Rain hammered down on all of them. The parking lot was a lake of gravel and mud. "You're sitting in a dark parking lot watching a diner where a child just walked in," Rex said. His voice carried the flat, measured tone of a man who was fully prepared for violence but hadn't committed to it yet. "You want to tell me why?" "We're looking for someone." "Aren't we all?" The shorter man shifted his weight. His hand twitched toward his jacket. Boone took 1 step forward. Just 1. And the man froze. Boone didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His body communicated everything his mouth never bothered with. "The boy's mother," the tall man said. "Claire Mercer. She has something that belongs to our employer. We were told she might have passed it to the child." "Who's your employer?" "That's not information I'm authorized to share." Rex smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Then we're done talking." The tall man studied Rex for a long moment. His eyes moved across the patches on Rex's cut, lingered on the president rocker, then slid to the four men surrounding him. He was calculating odds. Rex had seen that calculation before, in bar fights and standoffs, and the long seconds before a convoy ambush in a desert 10,000 miles from here. "This doesn't concern you," the tall man said. "The boy's sitting at my table eating my food. That makes it concern me." "You're making a mistake. I've made bigger ones. Ask around." The two men exchanged a glance. Something passed between them, a decision made in silence, the way professionals communicate when they know they're outmatched in the immediate geometry of a situation. The tall man lowered his hands slowly. "We'll be in touch," he said. "No," Rex said. "You won't." They got back in the SUV. The engine revved. The tires threw gravel as the vehicle swung out of the lot and disappeared into the storm. Its taillights were swallowed by the rain in seconds, and then there was nothing but darkness and the sound of water hitting tin. Boone exhaled through his nose. "That was a scouting party." "I know. They'll be back with more." "I know that too." They went inside. Ethan was behind the counter with Gracie, sitting on an overturned milk crate with his knees pulled to his chest. The coin was in his fist. His knuckles were white. He looked up when Rex appeared, and his eyes asked a question that his mouth couldn't form. "They're gone," Rex said. "For now." Gracie handed Rex a cup of coffee. Her hand was shaking. "Rex, I've known you 20 years. I've seen you do a lot of things I pretended not to see. But there's a child in my diner and men with guns in my parking lot, and I need to know right now whether this is something that's going to come back on me." "It won't. That's not good enough." Rex looked at her. Really looked at her. Gracie had been feeding iron vultures since the club's founding. She had patched up knife wounds in her kitchen, hidden men in her basement, and lied to federal agents with a straight face. She was not a woman who scared easily. The fact that she was scared now told Rex everything about how far this had already gone. "We're leaving," he said. "Tonight. We're taking the boy." "Taking him where?" Rex didn't answer. He turned to the others. "Colt, get Ethan set up with a rain jacket. Deke, call the chapter house, tell them we're coming in hot, and to open the back gate. Harlan, I need you to sweep the highway north and south. If that SUV is sitting somewhere waiting, I want to know before we roll." "And me?" Boone said. "You ride behind me. If anyone follows us, you do what you do." Boone nodded once. His face was granite. They moved with the efficiency of men who had done this before. Not this exact thing, but the pattern. The urgent packing, the quick deployment, the unspoken agreement that questions would wait until they were behind walls. Colt wrapped Ethan in an oversized rain jacket that hung to the boy's ankles and lifted him onto the back of his bike, securing him with a bungee cord around the waist and a firm hand on the shoulder. "Hold on to me," Colt told him. "Don't let go, no matter what." "I won't," Ethan said. And he meant it the way children mean things. Completely. Without reservation, without the adult understanding that promises are fragile. 5 motorcycles roared to life in the parking lot of Gracie's diner. 5 headlights cut through the rain. The formation was tight, Rex on point, Colt with Ethan directly behind, Deke and Harlan on the flanks, Boone at the rear with his eyes on the mirrors. They rode through the storm at 60 miles per hour on a highway that was more water than road, and not one of them slowed down. The chapter house sat 12 miles east of town on a piece of land that used to be a cattle ranch. A long gravel drive led to a compound of 3 buildings: the main clubhouse, a workshop, and a storage barn, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. It was not a fortress. It was not meant to be. But it was a place where men could close a gate behind them and breathe for a moment, and tonight that was enough. They pulled through the back gate at 9:47. The rain was starting to ease. Deke killed the perimeter lights, and Harlan walked the fence line while the others went inside. The main room of the clubhouse smelled like motor oil and old leather, and the ghost of 1,000 cigarettes smoked in the same chairs by the same men over the same arguments. A pool table sat under a single hanging lamp. A bar ran along the far wall, stocked with bourbon and not much else. Photographs lined the walls. Ride photos, group shots, memorial patches framed in black. One of them, near the corner, showed 6 men standing beside their bikes in a sun-bleached desert landscape. 6 men. Not 5. The 6th was Lucas Kane. Rex led Ethan to a back room that served as a guest quarters, a cot, a wool blanket, a space heater that rattled when it ran. He set the boy down and handed him a dry t-shirt that was 4 sizes too large. "Get some sleep." "Are you going to find my mom?" Rex looked at the boy's face, Lucas's face. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same expression that said, "I am afraid, but I refuse to show it." Something inside Rex's chest compressed, a pressure that had been building for 15 years, finally finding a surface to push against. "Yeah, kid, we're going to find your mom." He closed the door and walked back to the main room. The other 4 were waiting. Boone had poured bourbon. Nobody was drinking. The glasses sat on the bar like props in a scene that hadn't started yet. "All right," Rex said. He stood at the head of the room with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders drawn tight. "Let's talk about the thing none of us want to talk about." Silence. "Lucas is alive," Deke said, "or he was alive long enough to father a child and write letters to a woman none of us knew existed." "He kept her secret," Colt said. "From us. From the club. From everyone." "Can you blame him?" Harlan spoke from the doorway, his bulk filling the frame. He had finished his fence check and was peeling off his wet jacket. "Look what happened to him. He trusted us and we let him walk into Renko's machine alone." The words landed like a brick on glass. Every man felt the impact. "We didn't let him do anything," Boone said. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man holding something on a very short leash. "He made his choice. He always made his own choices. That was the problem with Lucas. He never waited for consensus. He just moved. And we never moved with him." Rex pulled out a chair and sat down hard. "That's the truth of it. He asked us to stand with him and we flinched, every single one of us. We told him to slow down, think it over, find another way. We gave him every excuse not to act because we were too scared to act ourselves. We were being careful. We were being cowards, Boone. You know it. I know it. Every time you crawled into a bottle for 6 years straight, you knew it." The air in the room changed. Boone's hand tightened around the bourbon glass. The tendons in his forearm stood out like cables. "Don't," Boone said quietly. "Don't what? Don't say what we've all been thinking since that boy walked through the door. Don't say that we abandoned our brother and he died, or worse, he lived and we never came for him." Boone stood up so fast the bar stool fell backward and cracked against the floor. He crossed the distance to Rex in 3 steps, and for a terrible moment the room held its breath. Boone's fist was cocked. His jaw was locked. His eyes burned with something that was half rage and half grief and entirely uncontrollable. Rex didn't move, didn't flinch. He looked up at Boone from the chair with the steady, unblinking gaze of a man who knew he deserved whatever came next. "Go ahead," Rex said. "If it helps." Boone's fist trembled in the air. 3 seconds, 5, 7. Then his hand dropped to his side and he stepped back, breathing hard through his nose, his chest heaving like he'd just run a mile uphill. "It won't help," Boone said. "Nothing helps." Deke stood and walked to the wall where the photographs hung. He pulled down the one with 6 men and laid it flat on the pool table under the lamp. The green felt glowed. The photograph was faded at the edges, but the faces were clear. "This was Tucson," Deke said. 2009. 3 months before Lucas went to the feds. Look at us." They gathered around the table. 6 young men, younger, harder, not yet broken in all the ways they would eventually break, standing in the Arizona sun with their bikes and their brotherhood and the absolute conviction that nothing could touch them. Lucas was in the center grinning. He was the only one grinning. He had always been the one who smiled when the others couldn't. "He knew," Colt said softly. "Even then, he knew what was coming. Look at his eyes." They looked. Behind the grin, Behind the sunburn and the dusty leather and the casual confidence, Lucas Kane's eyes held something that none of them had noticed at the time. A calculation. A decision already made. A man who had accepted his trajectory and was simply enjoying the last few miles of the ride. He didn't tell us about Claire because he was protecting her, Deke said. If Renko found out he had someone, Renko would use her. Lucas knew that. So he kept her separate. He kept the most important part of his life in a locked box that none of us had the key to. And then he put the key in a coin and gave it to his son. Rex picked up the photograph and stared at Lucas's face. He planned this. The coin, the cipher, the fact that Ethan would find us. Lucas set this in motion before he disappeared. He wanted us to find the boy, which means he wanted us to find whatever's at the other end of those coordinates. Coordinates, Harlan said. He pulled the coin from the center of the table where Rex had left it. He turned it under the light, studying the ring of dots. It's the old system. Dot clusters represent digit pairs. I can decode this in 20 minutes. Do it. Harlan sat down with the coin, a pen, and a napkin and began counting dots. The others watched him work. The room was quiet except for the scratch of the pen and the rattle of the space heater and the distant drip of rain from the gutters outside. Colt refilled his coffee. His hands were not steady. There's something else we need to address. What? The boy. We can't just keep him here. He needs stability. He needs someone who can... We're not handing him over to the county, Rex said immediately. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I'm saying we have a child in our custody who isn't ours. His mother is missing. We don't have legal authority. If the police find out he's here, they'll take him and we'll never get him back. And wherever they put him, Renko's people will find him before we do. The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. Every man in the room understood the math. Keeping Ethan was illegal. Surrendering Ethan was dangerous. Every option was bad, and every delay made the options worse. I spent 4 years in the system, Boone said. Everyone turned. Boone never talked about his childhood. Never. It was the one locked door in a man made of locked doors. 4 years in foster care after my old man went to prison. 3 homes. 2 of them bad. One of them the kind of bad you don't forget. He paused. The muscles in his jaw worked. That boy is not going into the system. Not while I'm breathing. It was the most Boone had said about himself in 11 years. The other 4 absorbed it without comment. The way you absorb a confession, with gravity, with respect, with the understanding that what was given cannot be given back. Then he stays, Rex said, and we move fast. Harlan looked up from his napkin. His face was strange, tight, like he'd just read something he didn't want to say aloud. I've got the coordinates. Where? Wichita, Southeast Industrial District. These numbers correspond to a specific building, probably a storage facility. How fast can we get there? 3 hours if the road's clear. They won't clear until morning. Deke checked his phone. Weather Service says the storm front extends another 60 miles east. We ride at dawn. Then we ride at dawn. The men dispersed into the clubhouse. Deke took first watch at the gate. Sitting on an overturned barrel with his prosthetic hand resting on his thigh and his good hand holding a thermos of coffee. Harlan checked the perimeter cameras, ancient units that displayed grainy black and white footage on a monitor in the workshop. Colt cleaned and organized the medical kit he kept in his saddlebag, the habitual preparation of a man who had seen too many situations go wrong to ever assume they wouldn't. Rex sat alone at the bar. The bourbon was in front of him. He didn't drink it. He stared at the glass the way a man stares at a door he's not sure he wants to open. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A text from his bail bondsman contact in Wichita. 3 words. She's in trouble. Rex dialed the number. The bondsman answered on the second ring. What do you have? Claire Mercer, 31 years old, lived in Hutchinson until 3 weeks ago. Employed at the county library system until she was terminated without cause after a visit from 2 men matching the description of Sentinel Shield operatives. Her landlord received a legal notice demanding she vacate immediately, signed by a law firm that handles Renko's property disputes. She pulled her son from school 2 days before the termination, paid cash at 4 different motels over the next 2 weeks, moving east. The trail goes cold 3 days ago. Where? Last confirmed sighting was a gas station in Newton. Security footage shows her talking to someone in a gray sedan. She got in the car voluntarily. The sedan had no plates. That's where I lose her. Voluntarily? That's what the footage shows, but voluntary doesn't mean willing. It means she walked instead of being dragged. Big difference. Rex closed his eyes. Anything else? One more thing. I ran her background deeper than you asked. Claire Mercer doesn't exist before 2015. No birth certificate, no school records, no work history before she showed up in Hutchinson with a 2-year-old boy and a job application. She's living under a constructed identity. Someone built her a new life, and they did it well enough to last 10 years. Lucas built it. That would be my guess. Rex hung up. He sat in the dark clubhouse and listened to the rain die outside and felt the weight of 15 years settle on his shoulders like a second cut. Lucas hadn't just disappeared. He had built a woman a new identity. He had hidden a child. He had engineered an entire life from the shadows, protecting 2 people the Brotherhood never knew existed. And he had done it alone because 5 men who called themselves brothers had failed him when it mattered most. Boone appeared at the end of the bar. He had been standing there for some time, listening. Rex could tell by his expression. "You heard," Rex said. "Enough." Lucas was alive for years after we gave up. He was alive and hiding and doing it all by himself. Boone sat down on the stool next to Rex. He didn't look at him. He looked at the row of bottles behind the bar, each one a different shade of amber, each one a different kind of forgetting. "I thought about drinking tonight," Boone said. "First time in 3 years I actually reached for a glass." "What stopped you?" "The boy. He drew motorcycles on a napkin, 5 of them. He doesn't even know who we are, Rex. He doesn't know what we did or what we failed to do. He just knows his mother told him to find us, and he walked 2 miles in a storm to do it, 8 years old." Boone's voice cracked. Just barely. A hairline fracture in a granite wall. "I can't drink in front of that. I can't be the man I was in front of that." They sat in silence. The storm was passing. Stars appeared through the gaps in the clouds, cold and indifferent and impossibly far away. At 4 a.m, Deke burst through the front door. "We have a problem." Rex was on his feet before the sentence finished. The others materialized from wherever they had been resting. Colt from the cot room, Harlan from the workshop, Boone from the bar stool where he hadn't moved. "The SUV is back," Deke said. "Not the same one. 2 of them. Parked a 1/4 mile down the access road with their lights off. I spotted them on the south camera. They're not moving, but they're watching." "How many men?" "I count 4. Could be more." Rex walked to the window and looked out. The access road was a dark ribbon cutting through the grassland. At the far end, barely visible, 2 shapes sat in the shadows like predators waiting at the mouth of a burrow. "They found us fast," Colt said. "They tracked us from the diner," Rex said. "Or they tracked the boy. Either way, they know where we are." "We can't ride out in daylight with them sitting there," Harlan said. "Not with the kid on the back of a bike." "And we can't stay here," Deke said. "This place isn't built for a siege. 1 road in, 1 road out. They pin us, and we're done." Rex turned from the window. His face had changed. Something had settled behind his eyes. A finality that the others recognized from years of watching him make decisions that drew lines in permanent ink. "There's a third option," Rex said. "We don't run and we don't hide. We go straight at them." "Rex, not the SUVs, the source. We decode the coordinates, we ride to Wichita, we open whatever Lucas left for us, and we use it. If Renko wants the coin, if Renko wants whatever's at the end of those numbers, then what's in that locker is the one thing he's afraid of. And the one thing a man like Renko is afraid of is the only weapon that can bring him down." "And the boy?" Rex looked toward the back room. Through the cracked door, he could see Ethan sleeping on the cot, curled on his side with the coin pressed against his cheek. The wool blanket had slipped to the floor. His sneakers were still wet, lined up neatly beside the cot, the way a child lines things up when everything else in his world is falling apart. "The boy comes with us," Rex said. "He stays with one of us at all times. He doesn't leave our sight." "You're betting his life on a dead man's treasure map," Boone said. "I'm betting his life on his father's planning. Lucas was smarter than all of us combined. Whatever he hid it for a reason, and he designed the trail so we'd be the ones to follow it. He trusted us. Rex's voice dropped. Even after everything, he trusted us. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the dumbest. Either way, I'm not going to let him be wrong. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Kansas plains. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and raw, the air carrying that sharp mineral smell of wet earth and exposed stone. Rex stood in the yard of the chapter house and looked east toward Wichita. The sky was the color of old steel. Inside, the men were preparing. Deke loaded saddlebags. Harlan checked communications equipment. Colt inventoried medical supplies with the focused calm of a man who expected to use them. Boone stood by his bike with his arms crossed, staring at the two SUVs still parked at the end of the access road. Ethan emerged from the clubhouse holding the coin. He had slept in the oversized t-shirt, and his hair was pressed flat on one side. He walked to Rex and stood beside him without speaking. Rex looked down. "You ready?" "Where are we going?" "To find what your daddy left behind." The boy considered this. Then he held up the coin, turning it so the morning light caught the engraving. The vulture on the front, the initials on the back. The ring of dots that 5 men had invented in a moment of youthful paranoia, and that now, 15 years later, had become the only map that mattered. "He was brave, wasn't he?" Ethan said. Rex stared at the coin, at the boy, at the road stretching east into the gray morning. "He was braver than any of us deserved," Rex said. And for the first time in 15 years, the words didn't taste like an excuse. 5 engines fired in sequence. The sound rolled across the flatland like approaching thunder. They pulled out of the compound in formation. Rex on point, Colt with Ethan in the center, Deke and Harlan on the flanks, Boone at the rear. As they turned onto the access road, the 2 SUVs at the far end started their engines. Rex didn't slow down. He accelerated. The formation bore down on the SUVs at 70 miles per hour on a gravel road that hadn't been graded in a decade. Stones flew. Dust erupted. The bikes screamed. At the last possible moment, the SUVs moved, pulling to opposite sides of the road, creating a gap just wide enough for the formation to blow through like a fist through a paper wall. They hit the highway doing 80. The SUVs fell in behind them, a quarter-mile back, matching speed. Rex didn't look in his mirror. He looked forward, toward Wichita, toward whatever Lucas Kane had buried 15 years ago, toward the truth that a dead man had spent his last breath protecting. Behind him, pressed against Colt's back with his arms wrapped tight and the lucky coin digging into his palm, Ethan Mercer rode into the unknown with 5 men who owed his father everything and had never paid a single cent, and who now understood, with the terrible clarity of a Kansas sunrise, that the debt was about to come due in full, and the price would be paid in blood or in redemption, and there was no longer any difference between the two. They rode for 2 hours and 17 minutes through a Kansas landscape that looked like it had been scrubbed raw by the storm. Fields of flattened wheat stretched to every horizon. Power lines sagged between leaning poles. The highway was cracked and potholed and littered with branches torn from trees that stood along the road like broken sentinels. The sky stayed gray, not the soft gray of morning clouds, but the hard metallic gray of a sky that had decided it was finished being kind. The 2 SUVs maintained their distance, a quarter-mile back, sometimes more, never less. They were patient, professional, content to follow rather than engage, which told Rex more than any confrontation would have. These men had orders to observe, report, track. The decision to act would come from someone higher, someone sitting in a comfortable office far from the mud and wind and grinding engine noise of this particular stretch of American nowhere. Victor Renko. Rex hadn't spoken that name aloud in years. He had trained himself not to. The way a man trains himself not to touch a scar, because touching it means remembering how he got it, and remembering means feeling, and feeling means acknowledging that the wound never actually healed. They pulled off the highway at a truck stop outside Newton, a massive concrete island of fuel pumps and fast food, and 18-wheelers idling in rows like sleeping giants. Rex signaled the formation to the far side of the lot, away from the cameras, behind a dumpster enclosure that smelled like diesel and rotting produce. The SUVs slowed on the highway but didn't exit. They continued east disappeared around a curve, and were gone. "They'll pick us up again on the other side," Deke said, killing his engine. "Different vehicles, probably. Renko rotates surveillance teams every 4 hours, standard protocol for high-value tracking." "How do you know that?" Colt asked. Deke was quiet for a beat too long. "Because I used to run those rotations. Before the club. Before everything." Nobody asked him to elaborate. Deke's past was a series of locked rooms, and the men had long ago learned that picking those locks produced nothing useful and plenty that was painful. But the information itself was valuable. Confirmation that what they were up against wasn't improvised. It was systematic. Renko didn't chase. He contained. Ethan climbed off Colt's bike and stood in the shadow of the dumpster enclosure, rubbing his arms against the cold. The oversized rain jacket from the night before hung on him like a tent. His face was pale but composed, the face of a child who had learned to compress his fear into a space small enough to carry. "I need to use the bathroom," he said. Colt took him inside. The others gathered by the bikes. Harlan pulled the napkin from his jacket, the one with the decoded coordinates, and spread it on the seat of his Harley. "Southeast Industrial District," he said, pointing at the numbers. "This puts us in a neighborhood of warehouses and storage facilities near the rail yards. There's a place called Prairie Lock Storage on Seneca Street. The coordinates are almost certainly pointing there." "Almost certainly," Boone repeated. "The cipher isn't GPS accurate. It's approximate. Lucas designed it to get us to the right block, not the right door. We'll have to search when we get there." "Search for what? A unit number? A key?" "I don't know, Boone. I decoded the location. The rest is whatever Lucas decided to leave behind. Which could be nothing, which could be a trap." "It's not a trap," Rex said. "You don't know that." "I know Lucas." "You knew Lucas 15 years ago. People change, Rex. People break. You put a man through what Renko put him through, he could come out the other end as anything. A ghost, a traitor, a weapon aimed back at the people who— Stop. Rex's voice was low, but it carried the weight of a dropped anvil. "You're talking about a man who hid his own child to keep him safe, who built a woman an entire new identity, who spent years in silence and shadow protecting 2 people from the most dangerous man in 4 states. That's not a broken man. That's a man who chose to carry the weight alone because the people who should have helped him carry it were too afraid to pick it up." Boone's jaw tightened. He looked away. The tendons in his neck stood out like bridge cables. They refueled. They ate gas station sandwiches wrapped in cellophane that tasted like nothing. Ethan drank a chocolate milk and sat on the curb with his legs crossed, turning the coin over and over in his fingers. At one point, Colt sat beside him and pointed at the engraving. "Your mom ever tell you what the bird was?" "A vulture," Ethan said. "She said vultures are misunderstood. People think they're ugly and mean, but they're actually important. They clean up what other animals leave behind. They take care of the dead so the living don't get sick." Colt stared at the boy. Then he looked up at the sky and blinked several times in rapid succession, and when he looked back down, his eyes were red. "That sounds like something your dad would say." "You knew my dad?" Colt opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Yeah, kid. We all did." Ethan absorbed this without visible reaction. He looked at the coin, then at the 5 bikes, then at the men standing around them. Something moved behind his eyes. A reorganization of understanding, the tectonic shift that happens when a child realizes that the world is larger and more connected than he had been told. "Is he alive?" Ethan asked. Nobody answered. They reached Wichita at 11:42 in the morning. The city rose from the plains like a cairn, clusters of buildings against a sky that had finally begun to crack, letting shafts of pale sunlight through. The Southeast Industrial District was exactly what Harlan had described, a grid of warehouses, distribution centers, and storage facilities bordered by rail lines that ran like veins through the concrete. The streets were empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional stray dog. Prairie Lock Storage was a low cinder block building with a corrugated metal roof and a chain-link gate secured by a padlock. The sign out front was sun-faded and half the letters were missing. A security camera hung from the eave, but the cable dangled loose, disconnected or never connected in the first place. Rex killed his engine in the lot and sat for a long moment studying the building. 20 units. Roll-up doors painted industrial green, most of them dented and stained with rust. A small office at the front with blinds drawn and a closed sign in the window. Harlan, which unit? The coordinates narrow it down to the east side, units 14 through 20. That's 7 units. Best I can do with the cipher. Lucas would have had another identifier. A key, a code, something only we'd recognize. Rex pulled the coin from his pocket and studied it again. The vulture on the front, the initials on the back, the ring of dots. He turned it edge on and something caught his eye. A detail so small he had missed it in the dim light of the diner and the urgency of the night. Along the rim of the coin, scratched into the metal with something sharp and fine, was a number. 17. Unit 17, Rex said. They approached on foot. Boone stayed with Ethan by the bikes, positioned behind a concrete barrier with a clear sight line to the street. Deke checked the perimeter. No vehicles, no surveillance, no signs of recent activity. Colt carried a bolt cutter from his saddlebag. Harlan brought a flashlight. The lock on Unit 17 was old but solid. Heavy-duty brass with a combination dial, not a key. Rex tried the obvious: birthdays, club dates, highway numbers they had memorized on early rides. Nothing worked. Let me. Deke stepped forward and examined the lock. He tilted it toward the light and studied the dial. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the coin. He turned it to the back, to the initials surrounded by dots. He counted the dots again. Not as coordinates this time, but as individual numbers. 3 clusters. 4 dots, 1 dot, 7 dots. He dialed 417. The lock opened. The roll-up door shrieked on its tracks as Harlan lifted it. Stale air rushed out. The sealed, preserved smell of a space that had been closed for years. Dust hung in the light from the flashlight like suspended particles of time itself. The unit was small. 10 by 10. Concrete floor, concrete walls, a single bare bulb on a pull chain that didn't work when Colt tried it. In the center of the space sat a steel lockbox, military grade, the kind used for transporting classified documents. Beside it, a cardboard box sealed with packing tape and marked with a single word in black marker. Brothers. Rex knelt beside the steel lockbox. His hands were trembling, not from cold, not from fear, from the knowledge that whatever was inside this box had been placed here by a man who had sacrificed everything and trusted that the men who failed him would eventually come looking. He opened the lockbox. Inside were 3 things: a manila envelope stuffed thick with documents, a portable hard drive, the kind used in the early 2000s, black plastic, scuffed at the edges, and a sealed letter addressed in handwriting that every man in the room recognized because they had all seen it 1,000 times on bar tabs and road maps and the club's founding charter. Rex. Read this first. Rex's fingers were clumsy as he opened the letter. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges. The ink had faded slightly but was still legible. He read it standing in the dim light of a storage unit in Wichita, Kansas, surrounded by the men who had once been Lucas Kane's brothers and who now stood behind him like mourners at a funeral they hadn't known was happening. He read it silently. His lips moved on certain words. His breathing changed, slower, deeper, the controlled breathing of a man absorbing impact. When he reached the end, he stood very still for a long time. Then he folded the letter and pressed it against his chest and closed his eyes. "What does it say?" Deke asked. Rex opened his eyes. They were wet. Not crying. Rex Holloway had not cried in 22 years. But wet. The surface tension of a man's last defense against his own grief. Lucas was alive until 2019, Rex said. His voice was barely above a whisper. He was alive for 8 years after we buried him. He was living under a false name in Oklahoma, working as a mechanic, sending money to Claire through anonymous accounts. He watched Ethan grow up from a distance. He never made contact because Renko had people watching Claire, and any connection between them would have put her and the boy at risk. The room was silent. The dust drifted. He gathered this evidence over the course of 7 years. Recordings of Renko's meetings, financial documents linking Sentinel Shield to murder-for-hire contracts, photographs. Witness statements from former Renko employees who were too scared to go to law enforcement, but who talked to Lucas because he was... Rex paused, swallowed. Because he was the kind of man people trusted. You said he was alive until 2019, Colt said carefully. What happened in 2019? Rex looked at the letter in his hand. Renko found out about the evidence. Not who had it or where it was, but that it existed. He launched a security purge. He sent teams to investigate every former associate, every whistleblower, every loose thread. Lucas knew it was only a matter of time before the trail led to him. So he made a choice. Rex's voice broke on the last word. He caught it, rebuilt it, kept going. He contacted Claire one last time. He told her about the coin, about the cipher, about how to find us if everything went wrong. He told her to wait, to live her life, raise the boy, and only come to us if Renko's people found her. And then he drove to a meeting with one of Renko's investigators, a man named Garrett Solis. The meeting was supposed to look like a chance encounter, two strangers at a bar, but Lucas knew Solis was there to identify him. He went anyway. Rex opened the letter again and read a single line aloud, and his voice cracked on every word. I'm going to give them what they want. They want a dead man. I'll be one. But the evidence stays. The truth stays. And one day, when they come for Claire, you'll be there. I designed it that way. I designed you back into the story because you were always supposed to be part of it. Forgive yourselves and protect my son. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was the sound of 5 men's understanding of the last 15 years collapsing and reforming like a building demolished and reconstructed in the same breath. Every assumption they had held, that Lucas was dead, that his death was Renko's doing, that the guilt they carried was the price of inaction, all of it shifted. Lucas hadn't been killed by Renko. He had walked into Renko's crosshairs voluntarily, knowing it would end him because it was the only way to draw the hunters away from Claire and Ethan. His death wasn't a failure of brotherhood. It was a sacrifice planned and executed with the same meticulous intelligence that had built Claire's false identity and hidden evidence in a storage locker and encoded coordinates in a coin. He had died to buy time, and now the time had run out. Deke was the first to speak. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed. The cardboard box. Open it. Rex pulled the packing tape from the box marked Brothers. Inside were 5 items. 5 leather-wrapped bundles, each marked with initials, RHDMCBHTBC, Rex, Deke, Colt, Harlan, Boone. Each bundle contained a sealed envelope and a small personal item that Lucas had kept from their early days together. Rex's bundle held the bottle opener he'd used at the first Iron Vulture's campfire in the Ozarks. Deke's held a compass they'd used on the Montana trip. Colt's held a field medic patch from their shared service days. Harlan's held a pocket watch that had belonged to Harlan's grandfather, and that Harlan had given Lucas as a pledge of brotherhood. Boone unwrapped his bundle last. Inside was a 3-year sobriety chip. That's impossible, Boone said. His hands were shaking. I didn't get sober until 3 years ago. This chip has today's date on it. No, it doesn't, Colt said gently. It has the year, 2023. Lucas would have planted these bundles before 2019. He predicted you'd get sober. Boone stared at the chip. How? Because he knew you, Boone. Better than you know yourself. Boone's face contorted. He turned away from the others and pressed both fists against the cinder block wall and stood there, his shoulders heaving, his forehead against the concrete, and nobody said a word because there was nothing to say that the wall wasn't already hearing. Rex opened the manila envelope. The documents inside were dense. Financial records, wire transfers, shell company registrations, all of it annotated in Lucas's handwriting. Pages and pages of meticulous evidence connecting Victor Renko and Sentinel Shield to a network of criminal operations spanning a decade. Money laundering through military contracts. Witness intimidation. 3 murders disguised as accidents, each one documented with photographs and forensic notes that Lucas had somehow obtained. But it was the hard drive that contained the weapon. Harlan connected it to a laptop he kept in his saddlebag. The drive was encrypted, but the password was the same as the lock combination, 417. And when the contents loaded, The screen filled with audio files. Dozens of them. Each one labeled with a date and a name. Rex played the first file. Victor Renko's voice filled the storage unit, clear, unmistakable. Speaking in calm, controlled English about the elimination of a witness in a federal corruption investigation. He gave names, he gave locations, he gave instructions with the casual precision of a man ordering dinner. That's a confession, Deke said. That's 100 confessions. Rex scrolled through the files. He recorded everything, every meeting, every phone call, every order Renko gave for almost 7 years. How? Lucas was smart. He was always the smartest one in the room. Rex closed the laptop. This is enough to put Renko away for life. Multiple life sentences. This is the kind of evidence that agencies dream about. Then why didn't Lucas take it to the feds himself? He tried. Rex pulled a sheet from the bottom of the manila envelope, a list of names with annotations beside them. Federal agents, prosecutors, judges. Beside each name was a single word written in red ink. Compromised. 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 Every official Lucas had approached, every person in a position to act on the evidence, was already in Renko's pocket. The system that was supposed to protect people from men like Renko was owned by Renko. Lucas had tried the proper channels. The proper channels had tried to kill him. That's why he came to us, Rex said quietly. That's why the coin exists. That's why the cipher points here. Because he knew the system wouldn't work. He knew the law was bought. The only people he could trust with this were 5 men on motorcycles who didn't answer to anyone. Colt's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and answered. His face changed in 2 seconds. Color draining, jaw tightening, eyes going sharp. He spoke in clipped syllables and hung up. We need to leave. Now. What? That was my contact at the VA hospital in Hutchinson. She's been asking around about Claire Mercer. 15 minutes ago, 2 men came to the hospital asking the same questions. They showed federal credentials, but my contact recognized them. They were Sentinel Shield. They weren't looking for Claire. Colt paused. His gaze landed on the open storage unit, the evidence spread across the floor, the laptop glowing. They were looking for this. For whatever Lucas left behind, somebody talked, somebody tracked us, or somebody's been watching this facility for 15 years waiting for someone to open this specific lock. Either way, they know we're here or they're about to know. Rex moved. Pack everything. Every document, every file, every piece of evidence. Boone, get the boy. Harlan, sweep the unit. Nothing left behind. Deke, check the street. Deke was already at the gate. He came back in 40 seconds, walking fast. Gray sedan at the north end of the block. 2 occupants, engine running. South? Clear for now. Then we go south. They loaded the lockbox and the cardboard box into saddlebags and bungee-strapped what wouldn't fit to the rear racks of the bikes. Boone brought Ethan from behind the concrete barrier. The boy's eyes were wide. He could feel the change, the way children feel weather shifts before the sky changes. Are they coming? Ethan asked. Yes, Rex said. He didn't lie to the boy. He couldn't. Not after reading Lucas's letter, not after understanding what honesty had cost Lucas and what dishonesty had cost everyone else. Will they hurt us? Rex knelt and looked into the boy's eyes. They want to, but they're going to have to go through 5 men who owe your daddy everything. And I promise you, kid, that's not a line any of them want to cross. They mounted. 5 engines roared. The sound bounced off the cinder block walls of the storage facility and echoed down the empty industrial streets. Rex led them south, weaving through warehouse alleys and loading docks, past rusted rail cars and chain-link fences, and the skeletal remains of a manufacturing economy that had packed up and left decades ago. Behind them, the gray sedan turned onto the street and followed. Then a second vehicle appeared. Black SUV. Different from the ones in Kansas, but moving with the same patient, predatory discipline. Then a third. Rex! Deke's voice came through the Bluetooth headset. Flat, controlled. We've got 3 tails. They're boxing us. I see them. There's something else. I just got a text from an unknown number. 1 sentence. Rex felt the cold move through him. Not the cold of the wind, not the cold of the morning. A deeper cold. the kind that starts in the chest and radiates outward like a crack spreading through ice. What does it say? Deke read it aloud. We have Claire. Bring the drive. Rail yard. Midnight. Come alone or she dies. Rex's hands tightened on the handlebars. The road stretched ahead of him, straight, flat, and utterly without mercy. Behind him, the SUVs maintained their distance. Ahead of him, the city opened like a trap, and in the center of it all, riding on the back of Colt's motorcycle, with his father's coin pressed against his heart, Ethan Mercer had no idea that the 5 men protecting him were about to face the one choice that Lucas Kane had spent 15 years trying to prevent. The choice between the evidence that could destroy an empire and the woman who had carried its secret in silence for a decade, between justice and survival, between the truth and the life of the only person who still connected them to the brother they had lost. Rex accelerated into the south side of Wichita, with 3 enemy vehicles behind him, and a dead man's voice in his ear, and the absolute certainty that the next 12 hours would end in either redemption or ruin, and that he no longer had the luxury of choosing which. They had 11 hours. Rex pulled the formation into the parking structure of an abandoned shopping mall on the south side of Wichita. 3 levels of cracked concrete and dead fluorescent tubes, and the ghost smell of a food court that had served its last meal a decade ago. They parked on the second level, deep enough to be invisible from the street, high enough to see anyone approaching from 3 directions. The SUVs that had been tailing them circled the block twice and then disappeared. They didn't need to follow anymore. They had delivered the message. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the prey to walk into it. Rex sat on the concrete barrier at the edge of the parking structure and stared at his phone. The unknown number, the message. We have Claire. Bring the drive. Rail yard. Midnight. Come alone or she dies. Come alone. The words were designed to do exactly what they were doing. Split the group. Isolate the leader. Force a choice between the collective strength of the Brotherhood and the individual responsibility of a man who owed a debt he could never fully repay. Renko understood leverage. He had built an empire on it. You're not going alone, Boone said. He was standing behind Rex with his arms crossed, his shadow falling across the concrete like a wall. Don't even think about it. I'm thinking about a lot of things. Then stop thinking about that one. Rex turned the phone over in his hands. If I show up with 5 bikes, they kill Claire before we get within 100 yards. You know that. And if you show up alone, they kill Claire and you and take the drive and we lose everything Lucas spent his life building. You know that. So what's the play? The play is we don't play their game. Deke walked over from where he had been studying a map of the city on Harlan's laptop. His prosthetic hand caught the gray light from the open side of the parking structure. They chose the rail yard for a reason. Open ground, multiple exit points, hard to approach without being seen. It's a kill box. They want you inside it. I know what it is. Then you know that going in, alone or otherwise, on their terms is not an option. We changed the terms. Rex looked at Deke, looked at Boone, looked at Colt and Harlan, who were sitting with Ethan near the bikes, the boy wrapped in a blanket that Colt had pulled from his saddlebag. Ethan was asleep. The coin was in his hand, his fingers curled around it even in unconsciousness, holding it the way a drowning man holds a rope. Talk to me, Rex said. Deke sat on the barrier next to Rex and laid out the map on the concrete between them. The Wichita rail yard was a sprawling complex of tracks and switching stations and warehouses that stretched along the Arkansas River on the city's industrial east side. Multiple entry points, multiple structures, a labyrinth of steel and shadow. They'll hold Claire in one of the central warehouses. High visibility, easy to control. They'll position shooters on the perimeter, rooftops, rail cars, container stacks. Anyone approaching on foot or by vehicle gets spotted a quarter-mile out. But not by bike, Harlan said. He had joined them, his bulk settling onto the concrete with a sound like a dropped sandbag. Rail yards have service roads between the track lines, narrow, unpaved, too tight for cars, perfect for motorcycles. You want to ride through a rail yard in the dark. I want to ride through a rail yard in the dark, while Renko's men are looking the wrong direction. Harlan tapped the map. Rex goes in the front, alone, on foot, exactly like they asked. He carries the drive. He makes the exchange visible, draws their attention, keeps their eyes on the main approach. Meanwhile, 4 bikes enter from the South Service Road, split into 2 pairs, and move through the yard on parallel tracks until they reach the central warehouse from the rear. That puts Rex alone with Renko's people for at least 10 minutes. That's why Rex has to sell it. Make them believe he came alone. Make them believe they've won. Rex stared at the map. The rail yard was a grid of intersecting lines and labeled structures, and in his mind it was already transforming into something else. A battlefield, a chessboard, a graveyard. Every route was a risk. Every structure was a hiding place or a trap. The margin between rescue and catastrophe was measured in seconds and inches, and the precise timing of 5 men who hadn't operated as a unit in over a decade. "There's another problem," Colt said from across the parking level. He was checking his medical kit again. Gauze, tourniquets, hemostatic agents, the portable tools of a man who expected blood. The drive. If we bring the real drive and something goes wrong, Renko gets the evidence and destroys it. That's 15 years of Lucas's work gone. We copy it. Onto what? We need a computer, a blank drive, and time we don't have. We have Harlan's laptop in 11 hours. That's enough. Harlan nodded. I can clone the drive, full copy. Take about 40 minutes. We give Renko the clone and keep the original. If everything goes sideways, the evidence survives. And if Renko checks the drive on site, the clone will be identical, file for file, byte for byte. He won't know the difference unless he tries to destroy it, and we pull out the original afterward. Rex made the decision the way he made all decisions, quickly, completely, without the luxury of certainty. Do it, clone the drive. We bring the copy to the exchange. The original stays with whoever's protecting Ethan. Who's protecting Ethan? Boone asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Every man looked at the sleeping boy. Every man understood that whoever stayed behind with Ethan would miss the fight, would stand in the darkness of an abandoned parking structure while his brothers rode into the most dangerous situation of their lives. It was a sacrifice of a different kind, not of body, but of presence, of brotherhood. I'll do it, Colt said. Every head turned. No, Rex said immediately. Rex, listen to me. I'm the medic. If someone gets hurt tonight, you need me at the rail yard, not here. I know that. But someone has to stay with the boy, and it can't be you. It can't be Deke, because you need his tactical experience. It can't be Harlan, because he's running communications, and it can't be Boone, because... Colt stopped. He looked at Boone. Because Boone needs to be there. For himself. For Lucas. This is the thing he's been carrying for 15 years, and if he doesn't get to set it down tonight, it'll kill him slower than any bullet. Boone said nothing, but something in his face shifted. A crack in the granite, a flash of something that might have been gratitude or might have been grief or might have been both. I stay with the boy, Colt said again. I stay with Lucas's son. That's my role tonight. Rex closed his eyes. When he opened them, the decision was made. Colt stays with Ethan. The original drive stays with Colt. If we don't come back by dawn, you take the boy and the drive to the Kansas City field office of the FBI, not the local office. Renko has people there, Kansas City. Ask for an agent named Reeves. Lucas mentions him in the letter as the one federal contact who wasn't compromised. Colt nodded. His face was calm. The face of a man who had accepted his assignment and would execute it without hesitation, even if it meant standing alone in the dark while his brothers fought and bled and possibly died 12 miles away. The hours passed in the slow, grinding way that hours pass before a fight. Harlan cloned the drive. Deke studied satellite imagery of the rail yard on the laptop, memorizing service roads and building layouts and the precise distances between structures. Rex sat alone at the edge of the parking structure, watching the sun move across the Wichita skyline, and didn't speak to anyone. At 8 in the evening, Ethan woke up. He sat up on the blanket and looked around the parking structure with the disoriented alertness of a child who has learned to assess his surroundings before he feels safe. His eyes found Rex, then Boone, then Deke, and Harlan bent over the laptop. His eyes found Colt sitting against a pillar nearby. Something's happening tonight, Ethan said. Not a question. Rex walked over and crouched in front of the boy. He was getting used to this position, kneeling, eye level, speaking to Lucas Kane's son as if the boy were a man, because in every way that mattered, the boy had earned it. "We found your mom," Rex said. "Some bad people have her. We're going to get her back." "The men from the diner?" "The men behind the men from the diner. There's a man named Renko who's been hurting people for a long time. Your dad spent years trying to stop him. Tonight we're going to finish what your dad started." Ethan held up the coin. "With this?" "With what your dad hid for us. The coin led us to it. Your mom knew it would." "Is she okay?" Rex didn't lie. He couldn't. "I don't know, but she's tough. She kept you safe for 8 years. That tells me she's a fighter." Ethan's lower lip trembled. One tremor. Then it stopped. He pressed the coin against his chest and looked at Rex with eyes that were 8 years old and ancient. "Bring her back," Ethan said. "Please." Rex put his hand on the boy's shoulder. His fingers tightened. "I will." At 10:30, they began preparations. Deke checked his bike, tested the headlights, taped the taillight to reduce visibility. Harlan loaded the clone drive into a waterproof case and strapped it to Rex's belt. Boone stood by his motorcycle and rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles and stared into the middle distance with the expression of a man reviewing his will. Rex pulled Colt aside. They stood in the shadow of a concrete pillar, out of earshot of the others. "If we don't come back, you'll come back." "Colt." "I heard you. Kansas City, Agent Reeves, the drive." Colt put his hand on Rex's arm. "But I need you to hear me too. That boy in there has lost his father, and he might have lost his mother. If he loses you, if he loses all 5 of us, he's got nothing. So whatever happens in that rail yard tonight, you come back. Because the evidence doesn't matter if the people carrying it are dead, and that kid doesn't need a dead hero. He needs a living protector." Rex held Colt's gaze for a long time. Then he nodded once and walked away. At 11:15, 4 motorcycles rolled out of the parking structure and disappeared into the Wichita night. The sound of their engines faded into the city noise, traffic, distant sirens, the hum of a metropolis that had no idea what was about to happen in its industrial underbelly. Colt stood at the edge of the second level and watched them go. Behind him, Ethan sat on the blanket with the coin in his lap and a look on his face that was too old for his body. "They'll come back," Colt said. He wasn't sure if he was talking to the boy or to himself. Rex parked his bike 2 blocks from the rail yard's main entrance at 11:42. He walked the rest of the way on foot, his boots crunching on gravel and broken glass, the cloned drive pressing against his hip like a second heartbeat. The night was cold and cloudless. Stars burned overhead with the pitiless clarity of things that observe but do not intervene. The rail yard gate was open. Not broken, open. An invitation. He walked through. The main approach was a wide gravel road flanked by rail cars and container stacks. Floodlights mounted on poles threw harsh white circles on the ground, creating islands of light in a sea of shadow. Rex walked through them one by one, his silhouette stretching and shrinking with each pool of illumination. He kept his hands visible. He kept his pace steady. He could feel eyes on him, the invisible weight of surveillance from rooftops and railcar shadows. The central warehouse was 300 yards ahead, a massive steel structure with a rusted roof and loading dock doors that hung open like broken jaws. Light spilled from inside, work lights, portable, the kind used on construction sites. They cast long, hard-edged shadows. Rex reached the warehouse at midnight exactly. Inside, the space was cavernous. Steel beams overhead, concrete floor stained with decades of oil and rust. Rail tracks ran through the center of the building, embedded in the floor like surgical scars. 3 vehicles were parked at the far end, 2 black SUVs and a gray sedan. 8 men stood in a loose perimeter, wearing tactical vests and carrying the posture of professionals. Former military, Sentinel shield operators. And in the center of the warehouse, under the brightest work light, sat Claire Mercer. She was bound to a metal chair with zip ties at the wrists and ankles. Her face was bruised, left cheekbone swollen, lower lip split, a cut above her right eye that had been bleeding and dried in a dark line down her temple. Her hair was matted and her clothes were torn, and she sat in that chair with her chin up and her eyes open and her back straight. And Rex thought, Lucas chose well. A man stepped forward from behind the vehicles. He was not tall, not physically imposing. He wore a dark overcoat over a tailored suit, and his hair was silver and his face had the smooth, preserved look of wealth that insulates itself from consequence. His shoes were polished. His hands were clean. Viktor Renko. Mr. Holloway. Renko's voice was soft, cultured, the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it because the world had always leaned in to listen. Thank you for being punctual. I appreciate efficiency. Rex stopped 20 feet from Claire. He could see her breathing, fast, shallow, controlled. She was watching him with an expression that combined fear and recognition and something else. Hope. The most dangerous thing a captive can feel. I'm here, Rex said. Where's the deal? The deal is simple, you have something of mine. I have something of yours. Renko gestured casually toward Claire. A trade. The drive for the woman. Clean, professional. Nobody has to get hurt beyond what's already been done. What's already been done looks like plenty. Renko glanced at Claire as if noticing her injuries for the first time. Regrettable. My people can be enthusiastic. I assure you it wasn't personal. It's personal now. Renko's smile was thin and cold, the smile of a man who found other people's emotions quaint. The drive, Mr. Holloway. Rex unclipped the waterproof case from his belt and held it up. Cut her loose first. I don't think so. Then we have a problem. Renko studied Rex for a long moment. His eyes were pale blue and absolutely empty. Not cruel, not angry, just vacant. The eyes of a man who had processed human suffering through a cost-benefit analysis so many times that it had ceased to register as anything other than data. I'll tell you what I think, Renko said. He clasped his hands behind his back and began to walk a slow circle around Claire's chair. I think you came here alone because the message told you to. I think you're a man of limited sophistication who follows instructions when they're delivered with sufficient threat. I think you brought the drive because you believe that handing it over will save this woman's life. And I think you believe that because you want to believe it, not because you've thought it through. I've thought it through. Have you? Then you've considered the possibility that I have no intention of letting either of you leave this building. That the drive is simply the final piece of a cleanup operation that began 15 years ago when your friend Mr. Kane decided to be a hero. Renko stopped walking. He stood behind Claire's chair and placed one hand on her shoulder. Claire flinched. Heroes are expensive, Mr. Holloway. They cost time and resources and attention. Your friend cost me a great deal. His woman has cost me more. And now his child is somewhere in this city, holding a coin that should have been melted down a decade ago. And 5 aging bikers are playing soldier in a game they don't understand. Rex's jaw tightened. His hand stayed loose at his sides. The child, Renko said, and his voice carried a new edge. Where's the child? Gone. Gone where? Far enough that you'll never find him. Renko's hand tightened on Claire's shoulder. She winced but didn't cry out. Her eyes stayed on Rex. They were communicating something. Not a word, not a signal, but a quality of attention that said, I know you're not alone. I know there's a plan. I'll be ready. I'll find him, Renko said. I always find what I'm looking for. It just takes time, and time creates suffering. Suffering for the woman. Suffering for the child. Suffering that you could prevent right now by telling me where the boy is and handing over that drive. I have a counteroffer. You're not in a position to make counteroffers. I'm the only one in this room holding the thing you want. That puts me in exactly that position. Rex took one step forward. The Sentinel shield operators shifted. Hands moved toward holsters. You take the drive. You release Claire. You walk away from the boy. Forever. You forget he exists. You forget she exists. You take your evidence and you destroy it, and you go back to your empire and you live the rest of your life knowing that 5 men on motorcycles let you walk because it was the smart play. Renko laughed. It was a small, genuine sound. The laugh of a man who found the absurdity of hope genuinely amusing. And if I don't agree? Then you get nothing. I destroy the drive right now. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence your people have spent 15 years trying to recover. Gone. And you spend the rest of your life wondering if there's a copy. The word copy landed in the warehouse like a stone dropped into still water. Renko's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes recalculated. The slight tightening of his jaw. The fractional shift in weight from one foot to the other. The micro-adjustments of a man reassessing risk. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Outside the warehouse, from the south end of the rail yard, a sound rose through the night. Low at first, then building. A rumble. A growl. The unmistakable vibration of motorcycle engines. Not one, not two, but four, moving through the service roads between the track lines, getting closer with every second. Renko heard it. His operators heard it. Heads turned, hands went to radios. "You said you came alone," Renko said. Rex smiled. It was not a warm smile. "I lied." The south wall of the warehouse had a loading dock with a roll-up door that was rusted half open. Through that gap, 4 headlights exploded into the building. The engine screamed. Gravel and sparks flew as the bike skidded across the concrete floor, splitting into pairs. Deke and Harlan left, Boone right, each pair angling toward the flanks of Renko's security perimeter. The operators turned to engage. In the 3 seconds their attention shifted, Rex covered the 20 feet to Claire's chair. He dropped to his knees and pulled the knife from his boot and cut the zip ties at her wrists and ankles with 2 savage strokes. "Can you run?" "I can do more than run," Claire said. Her voice was hoarse, raw, and absolutely furious. Gunfire erupted. Controlled bursts from the operators, wild returns from angles they hadn't anticipated. Deke's bike slid sideways behind a concrete pillar, and he was off it before it stopped moving, his prosthetic hand braced against the ground, his good hand pulling a weapon from his waistband. Harlan was already at the vehicle line, using the SUV as cover, his massive frame low and moving with a speed that defied his size. Boone drove straight through the middle. His bike roared across the warehouse floor at 40 miles an hour, directly at the cluster of operators near Renko. 2 of them dove sideways. A third raised his weapon. Boone laid the bike down. A controlled slide, the motorcycle spinning across the concrete in a shower of sparks, and rolled clear, coming up behind a steel support column, with his fists clenched and his eyes burning. The operator who had raised his weapon tracked the fallen bike and not the rider. Boone hit him from the blind side. 1 punch. The man went down and didn't get up. Rex pulled Claire behind a rail car that sat on the embedded tracks in the center of the warehouse. She was moving, functional, her body operating on adrenaline and fury and the accumulated survival instinct of a woman who had been running for 3 weeks and fighting for 10 years before that. "Ethan," she gasped. "Where's Ethan?" "Safe. He's safe. He's with one of us." Claire's eyes closed for 1 second. When they opened, the fear was gone. What replaced it was something Rex recognized because he had seen it in Lucas's eyes in that photograph from Tucson. The look of a person who has accepted their trajectory and is moving along it without hesitation. "Renko," she said. "Where is he?" Rex looked. The warehouse had descended into chaos. Gunfire echoing off the steel walls, muzzle flashes strobe lighting the darkness, men moving and falling and moving again. Deke and Harlan had pinned 2 operators behind the vehicles. Boone was engaged with a third near the loading dock. But Renko was gone. The space where he had stood behind Claire's chair was empty. His polished shoes, his silver hair, his empty eyes, all vanished into the labyrinth of the rail yard. "He ran," Rex said. "He always runs. That's how he survives. He lets other people fight and die. And he walks away clean." Claire grabbed Rex's arm. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "He can't walk away this time. Not from this. Lucas died to make sure he couldn't walk away." From the east side of the warehouse, Deke's voice came through the headset. 2 operators down, 2 retreating east, Harlan's hit. Rex's blood froze. "How bad?" "Shoulder, through and through, he's mobile." "Boone?" "Boone's being Boone." A crash from the loading dock. Boone had thrown an operator through a sheet metal partition with enough force to bend the wall outward. He emerged from the wreckage breathing hard, his knuckles bloody, his expression unchanged, the flat, focused look of a man who had found the one thing he was built for and was performing it without joy or hesitation. "Renko's heading for the north gate," Deke reported. "He's got a driver. If he reaches the sedan—" "He doesn't reach the sedan." Rex turned to Claire. "Stay behind this rail car. Don't move until someone comes for you." "Rex, don't move." He ran. Through the warehouse, past fallen operators and overturned equipment, and the scattered debris of a fight that had lasted less than 3 minutes but had changed the geometry of everything. He hit the north exit at full sprint and saw Renko 50 yards ahead, moving fast for a man his age, his overcoat flapping behind him, his driver holding open the door of the gray sedan. Rex was not going to catch him on foot. He knew that with the mathematical certainty of a man who has measured distance his entire life. 50 yards. Renko would be in the car in 15 seconds. The car would be gone in 20. The motorcycle. Boone's bike, laid down during the assault, was on its side near the loading dock. Rex changed direction, grabbed the handlebars, hauled the machine upright. The engine was still running. Boone's bike always ran, even when it shouldn't, a reflection of its owner's fundamental stubbornness. Rex threw his leg over the seat and twisted the throttle. The bike launched across the rail yard gravel like a bullet from a barrel. 50 yards became 30, 20. Renko was at the car door. His hand was on the frame. His foot was on the running board. Rex brought the motorcycle to a screaming halt, 10 feet from the sedan, gravel spraying in a wide arc that peppered the vehicle's paint and shattered the passenger side mirror. The driver reached for something under the dashboard. Rex killed the engine and stepped off the bike and stood in the headlights with the clone drive in one hand and his phone in the other. Renko paused, 1 foot in the car, 1 foot on the ground. His face was composed. Even now, even with his operation in ruins and his men scattered and the sound of sirens beginning to wail in the distance, Viktor Renko's face held the calm, controlled expression of a man who believed, had always believed, that money and power and the absence of conscience could solve any problem. "It's over," Rex said. "Nothing is over, Mr. Holloway. This is a setback. I've survived worse." "Not like this." Rex held up his phone. The screen was bright in the darkness. On it, a progress bar, 92%, 95, 98, and a status message. Uploading to FBI Field Office, Kansas City, KS. Uploading to Associated Press National Desk. Uploading to Wichita Eagle Investigative Unit. 100%. Upload complete. "The original drive," Rex said. "Not the copy, the original. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence Lucas Kane gathered over 7 years. It's not in a storage locker anymore. It's not on a hard drive you can steal or destroy. It's everywhere. Every newsroom, every field office, every server that your money can't reach and your lawyers can't silence. It went out 10 minutes ago. While you were busy watching me walk through your front door, the truth was already gone." Renko's composure broke. Not dramatically, not the shattering collapse of a man undone, but a fracture. A hairline crack that spread from his eyes to his jaw to his hands, which trembled once, just once, before he forced them still. The pale blue eyes that had been empty all night filled with something at last. Not fear. Recognition. The recognition of a man who has spent his life controlling the narrative and has just discovered that the narrative has slipped beyond his control forever. Sirens. Closer now. Red and blue lights flickering at the edges of the rail yard. Deke had made the calls. Harlan had provided the location. The timing was precise. Arrival after the fight, before the escape. The Brotherhood's final coordinated action of the night. Renko looked at Rex. "Your friend, Kane. He was always smarter than you." "Yeah," Rex said. "He was. That's why he trusted us with this. Because he knew that even men who fail can choose to stop failing." "How noble, Sig." Renko's voice was acid. "You think this changes anything? You think evidence and trials and public outrage can undo what I've built? Empires don't fall from exposure. They adapt. They restructure. They—" "Get in the car," Rex said. Renko blinked. "Get in the car. Drive. See how far you get before every law enforcement agency in 4 states has your name and your face and your recordings playing on a loop. See how far your empire stretches when the people you blackmailed realize the leverage is gone. See how fast your friends become your enemies when the cost of protecting you exceeds the cost of betraying you." Rex stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper that cut through the sirens and the wind and the distant rumble of idling motorcycles. Lucas Kane was worth 10 of you. He died standing up. You're going to die running. That's the difference between men like him and men like you. He chose his end. You won't get to choose yours. Police vehicles poured through the north gate. Floodlights swept the rail yard. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Renko's driver bolted from the sedan and was on the ground in seconds, hands behind his head, face pressed to the gravel. Renko stood beside the open car door. He looked at Rex one last time. Then he looked at the sky. The cold, starlit Kansas sky that offered nothing, no comfort, no escape, no mercy. And he placed his hands behind his back and waited for the officers to reach him with the rigid, mechanical dignity of a man who had finally run out of rooms to buy. Rex stepped back. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. The adrenaline, the exhaustion, the 15 years of compressed guilt releasing all at once like a fist unclenching for the first time in a decade. He walked back toward the warehouse. Deke met him at the entrance, his prosthetic hand dark with grease and his face streaked with sweat. Harlan leaned against the wall behind him, his left arm held tight against his body, blood seeping through a field dressing that Colt would have applied better, but that was holding. Boone stood in the center of the warehouse floor, breathing hard, his knuckles split and swollen, looking at something on the ground. He was looking at Claire. She was kneeling on the concrete where Rex had left her, behind the rail car, exactly where he had told her to stay. She was not crying. She was not moving. She was holding something in her hands. A photograph that had fallen from Rex's jacket during the fight. The photograph from the clubhouse wall. 6 men in Tucson. 6 brothers in the sun. Claire pressed the photograph against her chest and closed her eyes and whispered a name that only she could hear. And across the rail yard, bathed in floodlights and sirens and the cold clarity of a Kansas midnight, Victor Renko was placed in handcuffs, and the empire that had consumed Lucas Kane and hunted his family and haunted 5 men for 15 years began to collapse. Not with a roar, not with an explosion, but with the quiet, irreversible finality of a foundation giving way beneath a structure that was never built to withstand the truth. The sirens faded slowly, the way all storms fade. Not all at once, but in layers, each wave of sound pulling back a little further until the silence that remained felt louder than the noise it replaced. Red and blue lights swept the rail yard for another hour after Renko was taken. Officers moved through the warehouse with flashlights and radios, cataloging the wreckage of a battle they hadn't witnessed and couldn't fully understand. 2 Sentinel shield operators were carried out on stretchers. 3 more were led out in handcuffs, their tactical vests stripped, their faces blank with the particular emptiness of men who had followed orders for so long that the absence of orders left them hollow. Rex sat on a rail tie outside the warehouse and gave his statement 3 times to 3 different officers. He told them the same thing each time, the truth, or as much of it as they needed. A woman had been kidnapped. Evidence of criminal activity had been recovered. The suspects were employees of Sentinel Shield Private Security operating under the direction of Victor Renko. He did not mention the coin. He did not mention Lucas Kane's letter. Some truths belonged to the men who carried them, not to the reports that would be filed in triplicate and forgotten in a drawer. Deke handled the tactical questions with the clipped precision of a man who had debriefed with authorities before, in other countries, under other circumstances he would never discuss. Harlan sat in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic cleaned and redressed his shoulder wound. The bullet had passed through the muscle cleanly, no bone, no artery, no permanent damage. Harlan endured the treatment with the stoic tolerance of a man who considered pain a tax on living and paid it without complaint. Boone stood apart from everyone, leaning against the warehouse wall with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on something in the distance that nobody else could see. His knuckles were wrapped in gauze that was already soaking through. A paramedic had tried to examine him. Boone had said 2 words, "I'm fine," and the paramedic had looked at his face and decided not to argue. Claire Mercer sat in the open door of a police cruiser with a thermal blanket around her shoulders and an untouched bottle of water in her hands. A female officer was asking her questions. Claire answered them in a voice that was steady and flat and devoid of anything that could be mistaken for self-pity. She had been taken from a rest stop near Newton 3 days ago. 2 men in a gray sedan. They had driven her to a warehouse on the east side. They had asked her about a hard drive, about evidence, about a man named Lucas Kane. She had told them nothing. They had hit her. She had still told them nothing. They had moved her to the rail yard and waited. When the officer asked Claire why she hadn't told them what they wanted, Claire looked at her with bruised eyes and said, "Because my son's father died to keep that secret. I wasn't going to let his death mean nothing." The officer wrote that down. She didn't understand it, but she wrote it down. At 2 a.m, Rex called Colt. "It's done." Colt's exhale was audible through the phone, a long, slow release of air that carried 12 hours of tension with it. "Harlan? Shoulder wound, he's okay." "Boone?" "Boone's Boone." "And Claire?" Rex looked across the rail yard to where Claire sat in the cruiser. She had pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and was staring at the stars with an expression that Rex couldn't read from this distance, but that he understood in his bones. The expression of a woman who had survived something she wasn't sure she would survive and was now confronting the strange, vertiginous sensation of having a future again. "She's here," Rex said. "She's asking about Ethan." "He's asleep. He drew more motorcycles before he went down. 7 this time. 5 for us, 1 for Claire, 1 for Lucas." Colt paused. "He drew Lucas's bike with wings." Rex closed his eyes. The night air was cold on his face. His body ached in places he hadn't known could ache. Not just muscles and joints, but deeper, structural pain, the kind that comes from carrying weight for so long that setting it down hurts more than holding it. "Bring him," Rex said. "Bring him to Gracie's. We'll meet you there." They left the rail yard at 3 a.m. The police had cleared them to go, preliminary statements taken, contact information recorded, a detective's card pressed into Rex's hand with instructions to remain available. The investigation would take months. Federal agencies would be involved. The recordings alone would generate grand jury proceedings that could stretch into the following year. None of that mattered tonight. Tonight, what mattered was a diner on a forgotten stretch of highway and a boy who was waiting. Rex rode alone. His bike and the empty road and the cold air and the sound of the engine, which had always been the closest thing to peace he knew how to find. Behind him, at intervals of 100 yards, Deke and Boone followed. Harlan rode with his left arm tucked against his body, steering one-handed with the practiced ease of a man who had ridden through worse with less. The Kansas plains unrolled in the darkness, like a blanket being smoothed. No lights except the stars. No sound except the engines. The highway was a black ribbon cutting through a landscape so flat and vast that it made human concerns feel small, which was, Rex realized, exactly what he needed. To feel small. To be reminded that the world was larger than his guilt and older than his grief, and that it would continue turning regardless of what 5 men on motorcycles did or failed to do. They reached Gracie's at 4:17 in the morning. The neon sign was off. The parking lot was empty except for Gracie's pickup truck and a single light burning in the kitchen window. Rex killed his engine and sat in the silence for a long moment, listening to the ticking of hot metal and the whisper of wind through the grass. Gracie opened the door before they knocked. She was wearing a bathrobe and slippers and the expression of a woman who had not slept and had no intention of pretending she had. She looked at Rex. She looked at the blood on his shirt and the exhaustion carved into his face and the way he stood, slightly tilted, like a building that had survived an earthquake but hadn't been inspected yet. "Coffee's on," she said. "Sit down before you fall down." They filed in. The diner smelled like it always smelled. Coffee, bacon grease, old wood, the accumulated scent of 1,000 early mornings served to 1,000 tired people. They sat in the same booth they had occupied the night before. It had been 21 hours. It felt like 21 years. Gracie brought coffee, black, hot, in heavy ceramic mugs that had been chipped and stained by decades of use. She set a plate of toast on the table without being asked, because Gracie understood that men who had been through what these men had been through needed something simple in their hands, something warm, something ordinary, something that reminded them that the world contained things other than violence and fear. Boone wrapped both hands around his mug and stared into the coffee. Steam rose around his face. His knuckles were swollen to twice their normal size, the gauze dark with dried blood. He hadn't spoken since the rail yard. He hadn't needed to. Everything Boone had spent 15 years trying to say, with bottles, with fists, with silence, with the slow self-destruction of a man who believed he deserved to suffer, he had said tonight with his body, his presence, his refusal to stand aside while the brother he had failed was honored by the brother's son. Boone. Rex's voice was quiet, careful. The voice you use with a man who is held together by tension alone and might come apart if the tension releases too quickly. You good? Boone looked up from his coffee. His eyes were red. Not from tears. Boone didn't cry, or at least he didn't cry where anyone could see, but from exhaustion so deep it had become a kind of nakedness. Everything he usually hid behind the granite and the silence was visible now. The guilt, the grief, the bottomless self-punishment of a man who had watched himself fail someone he loved and had never found a way to stop the replay. I don't know, Boone said, and for the first time in 11 years, the honesty didn't sound like a weakness. It sounded like the beginning of something. Deke sat by the window. His prosthetic hand lay on the table, palm up, the titanium fingers slightly curled. With his good hand, he held his coffee cup and watched the sky through the glass. The first trace of dawn was appearing on the eastern horizon, a thin line of gray that separated the land from the sky, so faint it could have been imagined. You know what Lucas would say right now? Deke said. What? He'd say we took our time. A sound escaped Rex's mouth. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, but something in between that was more honest than either. He pressed his hand over his eyes and shook his head, and the sound came again. And this time Deke smiled, and then Harlan smiled, and then even Boone's mouth twitched at the corner in a way that on any other man would have been invisible, but on Boone was the equivalent of throwing his head back and roaring. They sat like that for a while, drinking coffee, eating toast, existing in the particular silence that comes after violence, which is not peaceful exactly, but is adjacent to peace, a silence that contains the echo of what happened and the fragile, tentative shape of what might come next. Headlights swept the parking lot at 5:12. Colt's motorcycle pulled in beside the others, and behind it Claire's silhouette was visible in the passenger seat of a taxi that Colt had called from the parking structure. The cab stopped. The back door opened. Claire stepped out and stood in the gravel lot in the pale pre-dawn light, and she was already looking at the diner door when it opened and a small figure came running out. The sound Ethan made when he saw his mother was not a word. It was something more primal than language. A cry that contained every hour of fear and every mile of walking and every night of sleeping in a stranger's care while the world he knew collapsed around him. He ran across the parking lot and hit Claire at full speed and wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face in her stomach and held on with the desperate strength of a child who has been carrying an adult's weight and can finally set it down. Claire dropped to her knees. She pulled Ethan against her chest and pressed her face into his hair and rocked him, slowly, the way she must have rocked him when he was an infant, when the world was small and safe, and Lucas Kane was alive somewhere in the shadows, watching over them from a distance that must have felt like dying every single day. "I'm here," Claire whispered. "I'm here. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Ethan pulled back just enough to show her the coin. He held it up between them, the vulture, the initials, the ring of dots that had brought them all to this moment. Claire took the coin and pressed it to her lips and closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were streaming, and she didn't wipe them away. The 5 bikers stood in the doorway of the diner and watched. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just stood there. 5 large, damaged, exhausted men in leather cuts and muddy boots, with blood on their clothes and coffee on their breath, and the weight of a decade and a half of failure finally beginning to lift from their shoulders. And they watched a mother hold her son in a gravel parking lot in Kansas, while the sun came up behind them like a slow, deliberate promise. Colt was the first to step forward. He walked to Claire and crouched beside her and checked the cut above her eye with gentle, professional fingers. "That needs stitches. I have a kit." Claire looked at him. "You're the medic." "Yeah. Ethan told me about you. All of you. He said you gave him a grilled cheese sandwich and a blanket, and that you rode through a storm to keep him safe." Her voice cracked. "He said you were scary but kind. He said you were like the vultures on the coin. People think they're mean, but they take care of things. Colt's hands paused on the wound. He blinked rapidly, cleared his throat, resumed working with a steadiness that cost him visible effort. "That sounds like something Lucas would say," Colt said. "It is. I told Ethan all of Lucas's stories, every one he told me before he—" Claire stopped, breathed. "Before the end. He talked about you constantly, all 5 of you. He said you were the best men he'd ever known. He said you'd failed each other, and that was okay because failure is what makes loyalty real. He said loyalty that's never been tested is just habit." Rex was standing 3 feet away. He heard every word. Each one hit him like a small, precise hammer blow, set. Not destructive, but corrective, like the tapping that straightens bent metal, reshaping the thing into what it was always supposed to be. "Did he know?" Rex asked. His voice was barely audible. "About Ethan? Did he ever see him?" Claire nodded. "Once. Ethan was 4. Lucas drove to Hutchinson and sat in his truck outside the playground near our apartment. He watched Ethan play for 20 minutes. He didn't get out. He didn't call. He just watched." She paused. "I didn't know he was there until later. He sent me a letter that night. He said Ethan had Lucas's mother's laugh. He said hearing it was the best and worst moment of his life." Rex turned away. He walked to the edge of the parking lot and stood with his back to the others and his face to the sunrise, and he pressed both hands against his thighs and breathed. In, out, in, out. The way a man breathes when he is trying to hold himself together and is not entirely sure the architecture will support the effort. Deke appeared beside him. They stood shoulder to shoulder, facing east, watching the line of light widen across the horizon. The sky shifted from gray to pale gold to the thin, washed blue of a Kansas morning. "We can't undo it," Deke said. "I know. We can't bring him back. I know that too. But we can do the next thing. The thing after the failure. That's what Lucas designed. Not revenge, not redemption. Just the next right thing." Rex looked at his road captain, the quiet, precise, careful man who had carried other people's burdens across war zones and highways, and 15 years of brotherhood without once asking for credit or comfort. "When did you get wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm tired. Tired men say obvious things, and other tired men mistake it for wisdom." Rex almost smiled. Almost. The morning built slowly around them. Gracie made breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, orange juice for Ethan, more coffee for everyone else. They ate at the big booth, 8 people crowded into a space meant for 6. Ethan sat between Claire and Colt, eating scrambled eggs with the methodical focus of a child who has been hungry enough times to treat every meal as something that might not come again. Claire kept one hand on his shoulder the entire time, as if confirming through touch that he was real, that he was here, that the coin had worked, that Lucas's plan had done exactly what Lucas had designed it to do. Harlan ate one-handed, his left arm in a sling Colt had fashioned from a clean dish rag. He chewed slowly and watched Ethan and said nothing, but the pocket watch from the brother's box was in his good hand, and his thumb moved across its surface in a continuous, unconscious circuit, tracing the shape of something he had given away 20 years ago and that had come back to him from the other side of a dead man's silence. Boone sat at the end of the booth and drank black coffee and did not eat. He watched the others with the expression of a man standing outside a warm room, looking through the glass, wanting to enter but not sure he remembered how. At one point, Ethan looked up from his eggs and met Boone's eyes across the table. "You're the one who hits people," Ethan said. Not an accusation, an observation. The matter-of-fact assessment of a child who has categorized the adults around him by function and has filed Boone under a specific heading. Boone blinked. "That's one way to put it. My mom says some people hit because they're mean and some people hit because they're protecting someone. Which one are you?" The table went quiet. Every adult held their breath. Boone stared at the boy. This small, direct, impossibly brave child who had walked through a thunderstorm and ridden through the night and slept on concrete floors and never once asked why the world was treating him this way. "The second one," Boone said. His voice was rough. "Always the second one. Even when I forgot." Ethan nodded, satisfied. He went back to his eggs. Boone looked down at his coffee. The surface trembled. Not from the table, not from the floor. from his hands. From the shaking that starts deep inside a man when something cracks open that has been sealed shut for years. Not a collapse, not a breakdown, but a thaw. The slow, agonizing, necessary thaw that happens when a frozen thing finally accepts the warmth. At 9 in the morning, a federal vehicle arrived at the diner. 2 agents from the Kansas City field office stepped out, a man and a woman in dark suits, carrying the particular air of competence that distinguishes agents who have been trusted with significant cases from those who have not. The man's name was Reeves, the name from Lucas's letter. Rex met them in the parking lot. He handed over the original hard drive. He explained its contents, its origin, its chain of custody from a storage locker in Wichita to the hands of the men who had been entrusted with it by the man who had gathered it. Agent Reeves listened without interruption. When Rex finished, Reeves held the drive in both hands and looked at it with an expression that Rex recognized. The expression of a man who has been waiting for something he wasn't sure would ever come. Lucas Kane contacted me in 2017, Reeves said, through a back channel. He told me what he had. He told me the field office was compromised. He asked me to wait. He said the evidence would come to me through unconventional channels and that I'd know it was real because the people delivering it would be. Reeves paused and something like a smile crossed his face. He said they'd be 5 guys on motorcycles who looked like they'd been through a war. He wasn't wrong, Rex said. 3 weeks passed. The season turned. The Kansas heat arrived in waves, shimmering off the highway and baking the fields into a pale gold that stretched to every horizon. The news cycle caught the story and held it the way a dog holds a bone, relentlessly, obsessively, chewing through every angle and detail until the marrow was exposed. Victor Renko was indicted on 47 counts. Sentinel Shield was placed under federal receivership. 14 compromised officials across 4 states were suspended pending investigation. The recordings Lucas Kane had made, patient, meticulous, spanning 7 years of a dead man's silent war, played in courtrooms and newsrooms and living rooms, and the voice on those recordings belonged to a man that no one had known existed until a boy walked into a diner with a coin. The town held a memorial for Lucas Kane on a Saturday in late June. Not a funeral. They had no body to bury, no remains to honor. A memorial. A recognition. The town council had voted unanimously to install a plaque at the Veterans Park because someone on the council had learned that Lucas Kane had served 2 tours before he ever rode a motorcycle, and because the council understood that a man who had given his life to expose corruption deserved at least a name on a wall. The plaque read simply, Lucas Kane, who stood when others wouldn't. Ethan placed the coin beside it. He set it on the stone ledge beneath the plaque, the vulture facing outward, the initials facing the wall, as if the coin were speaking privately to the name engraved above it. He stood there for a long time, his hands at his sides, his face tilted up toward the plaque, and nobody rushed him, and nobody told him it was time to go. Claire stood behind him. Her bruises had faded to yellow. The cut above her eye had healed into a thin pink line that would eventually become a scar, and then a memory. And then something she touched absently when the weather changed and her body remembered what her mind had learned to carry. She wore a simple dress. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a woman who had survived something impossible and was beginning to believe that survival was not the end of the story, but the start of a different one. The 5 bikers stood in a row behind Claire and Ethan. They wore their cuts, clean, pressed, the patches bright against the black leather. Rex in the center, Deke and Harlan on his right, Colt and Boone on his left. They stood the way soldiers stand at a memorial, feet apart, hands clasped, eyes forward, breathing in unison without meaning to. The town watched them. The diner regulars and the hardware store owner and the women from the library where Claire had once worked, and the mechanic who had fixed Ethan's bicycle, and the families who had driven past the chapter house for years without knowing what happened inside it. They watched 5 men in leather stand behind a woman and a child, and mourn a 6th man who had given everything to protect the people he loved, and something shifted in the way the town understood its own geography. The bikers were no longer strangers on the edge. They were part of the landscape. They had been part of it all along. After the ceremony, they rode. Not fast, not far. A slow procession through the main street and out along the highway that Ethan had walked in the storm 3 weeks ago. 5 bikes, and behind them, a pickup truck driven by Gracie with Claire in the passenger seat and Ethan in the back, his face to the wind, his eyes on the motorcycles, watching the formation with the quiet intensity of a child memorizing something he knows he'll need to remember for the rest of his life. They ended at Gracie's. Where else? The diner that had been the starting point and was now, in the way that stories sometimes complete their own circles, the ending point too. Gracie had closed for the afternoon and set up tables outside, and there was food, real food, not gas station sandwiches or diner toast, but brisket and corn and potato salad and a chocolate cake that Gracie had baked at 4 in the morning because she couldn't sleep and because baking was what she did when the world got too heavy to hold with just her hands. They ate in the sunshine. The bikers and Claire and Ethan and Gracie and a handful of people from town who had shown up not because they were invited, but because they understood that what was happening at this diner on this afternoon was something worth being near. Rex sat beside Ethan. The boy was eating chocolate cake with his fingers, which Claire had given up trying to correct. Rex watched him and saw Lucas. Not the ghost of Lucas, not the memory, but the continuation. The line that stretched from a man who had died standing up to a boy who had walked through a storm without crying. The same jaw, the same eyes, the same stubborn, unreasonable, beautiful refusal to give up. "Hey, kid," Ethan looked up, chocolate on his chin. "Your dad's coin. You know what it meant? Not the cipher, not the coordinates. What it really meant." Ethan thought about it. He looked at the 5 men sitting around the table. Rex with his scar, Deke with his prosthetic hand, Colt with his gentle eyes, Harlan with his arm in a sling, Boone with his wrapped knuckles, and his new, uncertain, almost smile. "It meant come back together," Ethan said. Rex nodded slowly. "That's exactly what it meant." The afternoon wound down the way afternoons do in Kansas. Slowly, generously, the sun taking its time descending through a sky that was too big to rush. The heat softened, the light turned gold. Shadows stretched across the parking lot and the highway and the fields beyond, and the world settled into the long, forgiving exhale of a summer evening. Claire and Ethan were going to stay in Hutchinson. The library had offered Claire her job back, quietly, without apology, the way institutions correct their failures when the cost of acknowledgement exceeds the cost of silence. Agent Reeves had arranged a security detail for the first 3 months, until the trial was underway, and the remnants of Renko's network had been fully dismantled. It was not perfect safety. There was no such thing. But it was enough to build on, and building was what Claire did. Carefully, patiently, one day at a time, the way Lucas had taught her without ever being present to teach. Before she left, Claire stood in front of Rex in the parking lot and looked at him with the clear, unflinching gaze of a woman who had measured this man against impossible standards and found him sufficient. "Lucas forgave you," she said, "a long time ago. He wrote it in his letters. He said the hardest part of disappearing wasn't the danger or the loneliness. It was knowing that you were blaming yourselves for something that was never your fault. It was our fault. We should have stood with him. And he should have waited, and I should have told someone about the evidence years ago, and Ethan should never have had to walk 2 miles in a thunderstorm." Claire shook her head. "Blame is easy, Rex. It's the simplest story you can tell. Someone failed, someone suffered, the end. But that's not the story Lucas left behind. He left behind a coin. He left behind a cipher. He left behind a plan that assumed, despite everything, that you would come. That's not the plan of a man who blamed you. That's the plan of a man who believed in you." Rex looked at the ground, then at the sky, then at Claire. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The photograph, the one from Tucson. You were holding it in the warehouse. How long have you had that picture?" "I didn't have it. It fell from your jacket during the fight. I picked it up because I recognized the faces." Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn photograph of her own, different from the one on the clubhouse wall but taken the same day. Same dessert, same sun. But this one showed Lucas alone, standing beside his bike, squinting into the light with one hand shading his eyes and the other resting on the gas tank. He was smiling. Not the grin from the group shot, but something quieter, more private. The smile of a man looking at the person behind the camera with the unguarded tenderness that only exists when you don't think anyone else is watching. "I took this one," Claire said. "Tucson was where we met, before any of it. Before Renko, before the evidence, before the running. He was just a man on a motorcycle, and I was just a woman with a camera, and for 3 days the world was exactly the right size." She put the photograph back in her bag and kissed Rex on the cheek, quickly, lightly, the way you kiss someone who has given you something that can't be repaid and doesn't expect it to be. Then she collected Ethan and got into Gracie's truck for the ride back to Hutchinson, and the boy pressed his face to the rear window and waved at the 5 bikers standing in the parking lot until the truck turned a corner and disappeared. The sun was low. The sky was orange and pink, and the kind of deep blue that only exists in the space between day and night. The diner's neon sign flickered on, Gracie's, all the letters working for once, as if the building itself had decided that tonight, of all nights, it would hold itself together. 5 motorcycles sat in a row. 5 men stood beside them. Deke zipped his jacket and pulled on his gloves, the left one modified to fit over the prosthetic, a small adaptation that represented the larger adaptation of his entire life. "What now?" Rex looked east along the highway. The road was empty. The fields glowed in the last light. Somewhere out there, a woman was driving home with her son, and a man's name was on a wall and a coin was sitting on a stone ledge, and the world was exactly 1 shade less broken than it had been 21 days ago. "Now we ride," Rex said. He threw his leg over his bike. The engine caught on the first kick, a deep, familiar rumble that vibrated through the frame and into his bones, and out through the gravel and into the ground, where it joined every other engine sound that had ever echoed across this stretch of Kansas highway. 4 more engines fired, one by one. The sound building, layering, becoming something larger than any individual machine to a chord, a heartbeat. The collective voice of 5 men who had failed and fought and nearly broken, and who had, in the end, done the one thing their dead brother had always believed they would do. They came back. The formation pulled out of Gracie's parking lot and onto the highway. Rex on point, Deke and Harlan on the flanks, Colt behind them, and Boone at the rear where he always rode, watching the road behind, guarding the back, making sure that whatever came next would have to go through him first. They rode west into the sunset because west was the direction of the horizon, and the horizon was where the road never ended. And for 5 men on 5 motorcycles carrying the memory of a 6th, that was enough. The engines faded into the distance. The neon sign buzzed. And inside a diner on a forgotten stretch of highway in the American Midwest, a woman named Gracie washed coffee cups and wiped down the counter and smiled to herself at the small, stubborn miracle of men who kept coming back. To the road, to each other, to the difficult, imperfect, unfinishable work of becoming the brothers they had always promised to be.